10 years, that's how long the war in Syria has been going on. A total of 11 million people, 11 million Syrians have been formally displaced. So that includes 6.6 million internally displaced refugees and 5.6 million that are international refugees. That's a combined total that represents actually half of the Syrian population back in 2010. So there's also $117.7 billion that is the estimate of how much the damage has been in Syria. So that includes infrastructure, food, education, and other stuff. 60% of the entire population of Syria is suffering from food insecurity. So they're either suffering from famine or they actually do not have access to food at all. And tragically, the death toll is so high and the war has been going on for so long that it's almost close to impossible to keep tabs of the death counts and the other casualties of war. And so this the question is how did it happen? How did it start? How did it last this long? It actually started in 2011. Presidents of Tunisia and Egypt were ousted, and it sort of inspired the Syrians to do a revolt because they were also suffering under a dictatorship. That event actually became known as the Arab Spring. March of 2011, a peaceful protest erupted in Syria. But then President Bashar al-Assad had other ideas. He responded by killing hundreds of demonstrators and imprisoning more. There were 15 boys that were detained and tortured for writing graffiti in support of the Arab Spring. One of the boys is a 13-year-old. He was killed after having been brutally tortured. They were trying to set an example. In July 2011, defectors from the military announced the formation of the Free Syrian Army. It's a rebel group aiming to overthrow the government, and Syria began to slide into war. So just to make it clear, it's actually Syrians themselves who were revolting against their own government. So it was a civil war, it was all internal, but things got worse when the international community got involved. In 2013, the CIA began a covert program to arm, fund, and train rebel groups opposing Assad. But the program was later shut down after it was revealed that the CIA had spent $500 million but only trained 60 fighters. In September 2015, Russia launched a bombing campaign against what it referred to as terrorist groups in Syria. Russia was formally backing Syria, and the US sent out a word. They did not like what was happening. Former US President Barack Obama had warned that the use of chemical weapons in Syria was a red line that would prompt military intervention. That's what they did in April 2017. The US carried out its first direct military action against Assad's forces. 1 year after April 14, despite Russian warning, the US launched an attack together with France, the UK, at chemical weapons sites. The war is still on, and the only one that's suffering are the Syrians. So I hope that while we keep watch of the Russian-Ukraine crisis, we also keep watch and also educate ourselves about what's happening in Syria. I think education and being aware is a first step towards action. I hope that someday it's important for us to be aware of everything that's happening in the world, especially if it's wars, especially when people are suffering. And so that's why it is important to get to know what's happening in Syria. It's an internal war, a civil war that started because they wanted to overthrow a government. Something that happened in the Philippines as well. We wanted to overthrow a government, a dictatorship. We were able to do it. But in Syria, their president didn't do the same thing that the Philippine president of that time did. he decided he was going to kill everybody that was getting in his way. And so, yeah, I hope that we get to educate ourselves about what's happening in Syria as well.